Hi, my name is Gil Robertson, president of the African American Film Critics Association. Today, we are delighted to talk to the creators responsible for the amazing new series for Hulu, The Other Black Girl. Before we kick things off, need to give you a disclaimer. This interview was coordinated with Readout and Hickey's personal representatives in accordance to the WGA strike rules. They are participating in this roundtable in their capacity as executive producers. So we're going to kick things off by introducing you to the AAFCA members who are on the call today, starting with Harrison Martin, KB, Jill Monroe, Nancy G, and Carolyn Hines. I'm going to let you guys do what you do so well, and I'll see you on the other side.
Wagner Books? Hello, yes.
Nella?
Will you get me another coffee?
Nella?
Will you get Advil for me?
Nella?
Nella,
2 copies.
Nella,
I need you to
Nella.
Nella? Nella?
There's someone you have to meet. This is Hazel May McCall, my new assistant. Really? Hi. It's just really nice that you're here.
Right back at you.
You know that hall of white people they have here?
Welcome to Wagner.
Wagner's just... You'll see. I am ready to recommend your promotion to assistant editor.
I lit so many intention candles for this. What the?
You were bold and you have a lot of potential.
Something really strange happened. I told you that company was a hellhole.
I'd feel sorry for anyone who was unfortunate enough to be in our way.
Did you come to my apartment last night?
What are you talking about?
I feel like I'm completely losing my mind. Hazel?
Hazel.
Girl!
I told you.
Have you noticed Nella acting weird lately? She just seemed a bit off.
This has been driving me crazy.
Crazy.
I know that this sounds like a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but every conspiracy about white people being whack ends up being true in like 20 years.
Good afternoon, good morning to those on the West Coast. Harrison Martin with FlixFrog out of Winston-Salem. There's so much to unpack with this series, and I had so many questions I was thinking of, but just to get down to it, what were your thoughts on, when you create a story or recreate a story where systemic racism is basically the horror character, but at the end, spoiler alert, there's a black person who is at the head of the scheme. What are all of your thoughts on, creating a villain that is a black woman and dealing with systemic racism with white people?
Well, I think the villain, I would argue, is not necessarily the black woman, but the system that she's trapped in. And I think that a lot of what we were trying to do with this series, the theme that we kept coming back to was how much you're willing to sacrifice and the choices that how much are you willing to give up of yourself to succeed and to get along in this system. And it's different for every single character in the show. It was different for all of us. It was different for every person in the writer's room. And Diana's answer is different than Kendra Ray's, than Hazel's, than Nella's. But it is a question that they are forced to answer because of this corporate system that they're trying to exist in.
Absolutely everything that Jordan said. And just to add in one little touch that was compelling to me on a personal basis is I loved the fact that there were Black antagonists on our show. I think that, you know, in a sometimes counterintuitive way, that's a kind of role in contemporary media that's often denied to us because there's this urge to create perfect Black characters that only do, you know, good things and are, you know, perfect angels. But I think that on The Other Black Girl, we had the awesome opportunity to play with a whole range, you know, and no one character was perfectly good or perfectly evil. And I think that that just created a more well-rounded and nuanced depiction overall.
Hi, I'm Nancy Green with Film Critique. Hi. And I'm so interested in this show because I mean, I have so many stories. Like I can relate so much to that. And I wanted to know, like, what are your stories that inspired you to get involved with this, like stories that you can share, and how did you want to like present this show for people?
I'll go.
I think Gus honestly has the most to say.
I mean, I actually know that Gus does have some stories.
I have one story that I'll share later.
You know, I'm a Black woman who I have existed in many predominantly white spaces. I was a classical musician. I went to Harvard. I then became a sitcom writer, and I was frequently the token. I was frequently the only one. And so when I read this book, totally separate of knowing it was going to be a show, I just read it as a fan a few years ago and really identified with Nella's experience and her journey. And, you know, it's interesting. She has that scene in the first episode with Colin where she, spoiler for the first episode, where she finally speaks up and is then, you know, publicly humiliated. I have experienced exactly that on a TV show that will not be named, where there was a character that they wanted to have that I found to be incredibly false and offensive. And I'll never forget, I used the term magical Negro, and I will never forget my white boss's face. And then the verbal smackdown that followed, the public humiliation that followed, until I was in tears because I had dared to say something. And I also, this goes without saying, but I'm the only Black person on this show in any capacity. Like I was the only Black person like in the building working on this show, truly. No one in the crew, no one in the cast, no one in the writer's room, just me. And I felt my soul leave my body. And so to watch Sinclair perform that scene so beautifully and emotionally, I felt myself from a few years ago experiencing it again, but actually getting a little bit of closure and a little bit of distance from it, because it is such a universal experience. I have known so many, and honestly, in the writer's room, which was, Gus was our only man, everyone else was a Black woman. Oh, we had one white woman, but everyone else was a Black woman. And when it came to talking about, you know, what pieces of the book do we definitely want to see, that was a resounding scene that everyone knew we had to have, because so many of us had lived it.
I mean, Miriam, I thought you were going to say something, but mine is not as bad at all, obviously. But to what Jordan is saying, I have often been the only gay person in many, many writers' rooms, and that is just sort of it. I'm so lucky and so grateful to have been able to work on this show, because it is a specific experience that is also universal. Everybody wrestles with the question of how much of your person, your actual soul, are you able to be at work? And And should you be that? And are you safe if you're that? I mean, my story is just that one time I was in this writer's room and people, there's that line that Hazel says where it's like, sometimes you just got to be the person they want you to be. And there was this moment where people were talking about baseball, and I said something where I was like, oh my God, like sports ball or whatever, like gay people don't know what sports are. And it got a laugh, and you're in a comedy room, so you do anything you can to get a laugh and to make people comfortable. And Jordan turned to me and was like, Gus, you know everything about baseball. And I was like, I do. Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did I like cut myself off and like make myself less than and make myself a stereotype just so that these other people would be comfortable with what they think gay people are like? I don't know. It obviously a much lower stakes situation.
But he is like a baseball encyclopedia.
The example that comes to mind for me is actually goes to 9th grade, oddly enough. I think similarly to you, Jordan, really was educated K through 12 in primarily white institutions. So I went to private school in New York City from kindergarten, which is its own film that we'll set aside for now. But one thing that happened is that I switched schools from 8th to 9th grade, and I entered a new school for high school. It's a very wealthy, very white school, and there had been essentially one other Black girl, and I was the other Black girl. I was the new Black girl coming in. And initially, we did not gel. It was like the forces of the school. I mean, we talked about it later, but I had a very difficult reception from this other Black girl, I think, because she sensed the scarcity of resources of affection and identity amongst the student body, as if there could only be one person. And so that experience that Nella and Hazel go through in some way, where it's this push and pull of, oh yay, like sisterhood, but also, is there space enough for us? And are we gonna battle it out without them even having to tell us that this is something that we need to do, is something that I experienced as a preteen. And and we made friends after 9th grade. We were friends, but it was only until college that we talked about it and we really kind of unpacked what was going on. And she told me straight up that she was just scared that her place in the school would be usurped by this other Black girl. And it's just, it's pretty sick that 14-year-olds are having to grapple with these kinds of concepts. Meanwhile, all the white kids in the grade are going about like la la la, oblivious. But that was the system that we were placed into. So that I identified with a lot.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you guys so much. Wonderful show.
Hi, KB here with Through the Lens of Lady KB, and my question is actually for Jordan and Gus. So as producers, can you guys talk a little bit about casting? Because I find that Sinclair and Ashley have such divine chemistry throughout the series. So how did you know that the two of them were kind of perfectly suited to be Nella and Hazel? And I'll start with you, Jordan.
Oh man, yeah. I'm so glad you asked this question, because I love to talk about them, and also they can't talk about themselves because they're not being paid a fair wage. And so I really love to, bring up their cause and also bring up their fantastic work. Casting was a long process. It was months and months and months. We saw a lot of people, and the two of them are just so undeniable. And I think that the moment that it really clicked was their chemistry read, because they're just such, first of all, they're so open as actors, and they're such professionals, and there was just this immense amount of trust, and they both immediately saw what the point of the show was, what the vision was. And so it became this like wonderful, open, collaborative experience. And I think, it's no secret that there are some changes in the show from the book. And I think a lot of the character changes, especially when it came to Hazel, came directly from who Ashley is and getting to know her and starting to feel this feeling of like, oh, wow, maybe Hazel does want to be friends with Nella. And because they're both such sweet people and such kind, generous people. And so it really just kind of their own personalities and what they were bringing to these characters really did actually start to shape the story that we were telling between them. So anyway, they're amazing. If anyone ever gets the chance to work with them or cast them in anything, they're some of the greatest people that we've worked with.
They're fantastic. If we gave them something and it wasn't working, it was because Jordan and I had done something wrong. And it was not well written, because they can do anything and they are just absolutely fantastic. You work with so many people where you're like, oh, I don't know if it's gonna work. I don't know if it's gonna work. But you'd sit there and you'd just be spellbound. But to what Jordan was saying with Ashley and the Hazel changes, we were so excited to give her this like warmth and to give her this backstory and to see this other shade of what we were talking about, how not everyone is perfectly good, not everyone is perfectly bad. And you kind of want Hazel to succeed a little bit. and it's all because of the strength of Ashley's performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They are both so incredible. So thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. I love that.
Hi, Jill Monroe, RSVP with Jill Monroe and KBLA Talk 1580. So one of the things that I really connect with in the series is about the isolation, which we've talked about, of the characters in that role, in that experience. But as Gus just mentioned about sometimes people cannot, we grapple with being our full selves in the workplace and so forth. But since this is a story that centers on Black women, how do you think universally it will appeal to others? Because I feel it does, and there's a story there, but how do you feel about bringing that to others and allowing them to connect with it?
Yeah, I mean, I love that Black women are connecting with it primarily, but I also really love that lots of different people are connecting with it. I mean, I've gotten such wonderful feedback in the last couple of days since the show dropped. And it's been from surprising places. It's like, this white dude from like Canandaigua, New York, like texted how much he identifies with the show. And he's watched the first 6 episodes in one sitting. And it's cool because I'd like to ask him what he's getting out of it. But I think there are very universal themes, like Gus was saying earlier, in this question of what you give up to survive in a corporate space and in like a capitalist system, because I think it does require compromise and sacrifice from every person who enters the system, not just women or Black women. And so I do think there is a universal message in Nella's struggle. And like, I mean, in that very first episode, she has to eat shit to get a promotion. You know what I mean? And in the second episode, for a few episodes. And it's like, we all have had to like stomach something that maybe we don't agree with, or we've had to, tell our bosses how smart they are when we don't necessarily believe it, just to, advance. And it sounds very, crass when I say it like that, but it is a universal experience and sacrifice.
Yeah, totally. I think when everything that Jordan said, and then when Malika in episode 107 says capitalism is just another kind of cult, like that is 100% what this show, the universality of the show. Any system that forces people to compete for resources to survive is going to be corrupt, and it's going to fuck with people's lives and people's souls. And you even see that I think what we wanted to say was that like there is no way to participate in the system without giving up something. And whether that's your identity, whether that's your happiness, whether that's your time, I think the sort of like crazy funhouse mirror of Vera and her experience in the show, look at everything that this woman gave up. She gave up her morals, and she sacrificed her morals to publish that book, and look what happened. She got thrown to the curb, and everything that she sacrificed was not worth it. And she has to deal with the fact that she was a bad person for many years, and look what happened. And it's sort of like, I think there is a universality of like, why do we continue to come back to this system and want the success? Like, what is that success worth? And then you see Kendra Ray at the end and the choice that she made, which was to completely take herself out of the system. But the sacrifice she made was that she left everybody else behind, and she only cared about herself, and she lost all of her dreams. She wasn't able to keep making books. So I think everyone approaches this ladder with deciding which rung they're willing to get to.
Dana Abercrombie, the Coalition. Thank you so much for speaking to us. What I wanted to know is, this is an adaptation, and within that self, it can bring many different nuances and different characters. What would you say was, no matter what, the guiding factor or the voice that you never wanted to lose when it came throughout this whole series, that you felt had to remain consistent?
Oh, these are great questions, you guys. Really great questions. Oh, wow, I love it. I think, first of all, it was really wonderful that we had Zakiya with us the entire time. She was in the writer's room, and she co-wrote the pilot, and she wrote episode 9. And so it was really wonderful that anytime we needed to like gut check the way a story was going, or the way we were changing a character, or changing the way we were telling the story, she was there as sort of like the person who could say, yeah, this is in the spirit of the book or not. And she was incredibly like open and collaborative about it, and not precious about, the specifics of how things had to go. So that was a good sort of like guiding light. But I think also for Gus and I, as comedy writers, that is our background, is like almost every show we've written for has been a half-hour sitcom, and it's the way that we learned how to be writers. So we definitely always wanted to keep this lightness and this spirit of comedy throughout the entire season. And it's, it's very present in the book too. Like Zakiya wrote a very wry character in Nella, and she has a sort of sense of humor about the world. So even when things got intense and spooky, and, there were these thriller aspects, we still wanted to make sure we were keeping things humorous.
Yeah, totally. I think for Jordan and me, we've always sort of looked at the world from a bit of an outsider's perspective, and in that way, you see things differently than everyone else, and you sort of have to laugh at the ridiculousness of how everyone else is going about the world. And that was sort of exactly what we loved about Nella in the book, and we didn't want to lose the fact that if you don't laugh at how insane the direness of the world is, you're gonna cry. You won't survive. You have to have a sense of humor, and so that we think this like secret survival skill of Nella's is her sense of humor.
The last bit that I would add on to what Jordan and Gus said, which I think is really just another piece of what you both were already talking about, is the reality of Nella and the nuance of her character, and sort of grounding everything ultimately is that she feels real, that her perspective feels true to life. And, as the show goes on, some of the scenarios become more heightened than what we probably experience on a day-to-day basis. But something that, we all talked about and was really important to us was also always tracking Nella as a real person and her emotions and her responses in that kind of space. Which also makes it funny, because we have this real human person charting insanity but she stays herself. She doesn't kind of spin out as well.
So my next question is actually for you, Mariama. I know that you directed a couple of episodes this season, but I want us to talk specifically about the pilot, the first episode. What was it for you in terms of prepping to bring this out into the gate as the very first episode? What was it like? What did you want to make sure you wanted to get across and setting the tone for the remaining episodes?
Thanks, KB. That's a great question. We had a lot of time and prep, and I think that it was really important to all of us to really feel as if the first episode was a strong representation of everything that would come to follow. And it's complex when you have a story like this one that's balancing multiple tones and genres, and we're also trying to dial in on the aesthetic. Thankfully, I had Gus and Jordan as the ideal partners in such a venture, and we spent a lot of time talking about it and wondering about it. And really, it was multifaceted. It's everything you can imagine. We went granular with the wardrobe. Trust me, we went very granular with the wardrobe. We talked about, what the hair would be like, what's Nella's hair journey. It was really like an all hands on deck collaborative process. And then, as a director, I was also wondering how to communicate the feeling of excitement and freshness and also suspense, how to make that come across visually. And it's something that I tried to achieve with a little bit of, editing that would sometimes leave you feeling a little bit off your foot, thinking about sort of the transition in the first scene from the office onto the subway, and also how to communicate Wagner's isolation and severity just in an image. That was a collaboration between Andrew Jackness, our production designer, and myself, Gus and Jordan, all of us just thinking about how should we feel when we get inside of Wagner for the first time. So I think that a lot of what I was thinking about was how to set up and define the spaces, how to move between them, and then also bringing in, the awesome performances and introducing us to the characters that will take us through the series.
My second question probably revolves around Black hair. Black hair is one of the most important underlying themes of this series. And I noticed around when I was in high school, my mom started to be very particular about what she put in her hair. And a movie I saw earlier this year, they cloned Tyrone. I don't know if any of you've seen it, but once that conditioner got in that lady's hair and she became more passive, as soon as I saw that scene in this show, like a light bulb clicked and I was like, maybe it's a shared conspiracy. Do you guys have any thoughts on that matter? Are you very particular about your hair in general? You too, Gus, what are your thoughts on that subject?
Is Gus frozen, or is he? I think he's actually frozen. I don't think he's like.
I thought that Gus just like manually.
I thought he was doing like a. Amazing.
Zoom said.
Zoom said nope. I love that you referenced they cloned Tyrone, because Jewel Taylor, who wrote and directed that, was my former student. And yes, and I love him so much. And I'm so thrilled for his success. But yeah, obviously, like, Black hair and the mechanism that we use in the show and in the book it's a very, very important topic. And, going back to the writer's room, another resounding answer when we said, like, okay, what are the important scenes from the book that you must see in the show? The hair party was a huge, huge thing for people. And I think, you know, the fact that Zakiya, this is spoilery for, I guess, people who haven't read the book or seen the show, but the fact that Zakiya chose to use hair grease as this weapon, essentially, is so poignant, is so gut-wrenching, I think, for Black women. I mean, there is like a visceral reaction to, for me at least, like if I smell the hair products that I use or that my mom uses or used on me, like there's a very like, there's a nostalgia to it. There's a legacy with Black women in our hair. And so it was very important to maintain that and to highlight it. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, something else that I find really interesting and kind of smart about the way that Zakiya wrote it into the novel and the way that that kind of twist storyline plays out on the show is that rather than the method of control being a hair straightener or anything like that, it's a grease. It's a simple hair product. It makes me think of my trials and tribulations trying to get the perfect twist out using Miss Jessie's little hair products. Finding out years later they were putting texturizer and all sorts of chemicals into their hair to achieve this. I was twisting myself up quite literally in knots trying to achieve this perfect natural hairstyle that was actually unattainable using the products that were marketed to me. And so I think that, you know, it's so complicated with Black women in our hair because it's not necessarily even the simplest story, which is still an interesting story, which is, you know, perms and relaxers and the damage that does to us. There's levels to it, right? And it's like, you know, there's clever capitalists targeting us at every place we turn. So now, you know, the natural hair movement becomes a big thing, but they're still marketing something that's predicated on this new ideal that is also very difficult to reach and also involves spending a lot of your money on a lot of products with confusing steps that have you working for hours trying to get the perfect thing, you know? So I think that that's the cool thing with, you know, with Hazel's mysterious, you know, Hazel's not out here rocking like, you know, pin straight hair. She's representing this kind of earth mother persona, but there are still some pitfalls contained therein, you know, and so I just think that it's interesting, and I'm glad to have gone in that direction on this show.
Thank you. I just wanted to say I love that last answer. So my question is, I wanted to know, can you talk about some of the difficulties in getting this show made? Because as I was watching it and stuff, one of the things I was like, I can't believe they let them do this. Like, really? Like, I'm so glad that this is being presented. So I wanted to know, what were some challenges that you faced in getting it made or in being part of the project?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, you know, this show had early champions in Rashida Jones and Tara Duncan, and they fought for it to have a space, you know, on Onyx and on Hulu. And then in the actual like process of making it, I think there were a lot of things that we had to fight for along the way that, again, it was great that we had Rashida to help us in those fights. For example, I think a lot of people really loved the music, but we had to fight for a lot of Anita Baker. We fought so hard for Anita Baker. We fought so hard for Busta Rhymes. Like, you know, some people didn't understand what we were trying to do with those moments. And thank goodness we had people who got it, who could be our champions. You know, I think it's not everybody's experience, this show, you know, and so we had to explain a lot of the time what we were trying to do and the story we were trying to tell. But thank goodness we were able to get those things in, because I know in particular the music has been something that a lot of people have really responded to.
Yeah, and we were so lucky to have the book. We were so lucky to have this like incredibly popular book, incredibly successful book. Anytime that people would question us, we'd be like, it's in the book that you bought. You paid a lot of money for this book. So but we were so lucky to have Zakiya there as well, which also gave us, you know, a sort of stamp of approval that here is this woman who wrote this incredible piece and she's trusting us. So like, believe us, basically.
Yeah.
It's nice. Thank you. Mariama, did you have something you wanted to add?
I think Gus and Jordan are really the experts on, they saw a lot more of what was going on behind the scenes. So, you know, they're the ones who know all about all of the battles that had to be fought. For me, you know, it was comparatively a walk in the park. I just got to show up and, you know, and direct. So I was lucky in that sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Jill Monroe again. So there's so many pieces of the episodes and the episodes weave together that, you know, call out to people and different things. But for you guys, as being the creatives behind the show, but also as fans of the book or the project itself, what are your favorite episodes or scenes that you're like, you got to see this and you be hooked and ready to?
I mean, oh God, it's hard to pick because I do genuinely, I'm very proud of the whole show. I think episode 7, which is the hair party, is a really special episode. I also think, Mariama, your second episode, 109, the Hazel episode, is a really, really special thing. And some of my fondest memories on set are from filming that episode, because it was such a, it was so emotional for all of us. There was a lot of like crying and hugging happening. And Ashley just wowed us all for a week. And yeah, and I think also, Mariama, it was just nice to be around you. You know, it was nice to have you back, because you really, I think because you were there from the very beginning, you know, like you understand it so well and so deeply. So having you as the director and Zakiya as the writer and Ashley, like just all of that beautiful, perfect storm of collaborators, that made 109 a very, very special experience.
I loved that experience as well. And also for context, that was the last, I think I'm right. That was the last episode that we shot. So even though it's the second to last episode. So, you know, Jordan, you and Gus had also been on the ride for so long. So I'm sure it's also like this catharsis coming to the very end. I also was very fortunate to get to watch episodes 6 and 7 yesterday with the director of those episodes, Naima Ramos Chapman. So I love those episodes. They're really fun.
Yes.
I also really like the barbershop scene. That actor, it was like he's almost giving telenovela, but like in the best way, where I was gasping. I was truly, the twists and the turns, I felt like just a fan. Right? He was saying like, "Don't talk to me about Massachusetts." I was like, what happened? So I mean, I think that it's just like, the show is so fun. It's just, there's so many twists and turns. There's so many side characters that come on and steal the show. I don't want to give a spoiler, but there's a Shawnee. What happens with Shawnee? Hazel is a lot. So just seeing what these characters get up to was really fun.
I totally agree with everyone. I think my favorite scene in the show is in 107, and it's Malika and Nella in the bathroom at the hair party, and Malika being like, just because these girls are fancy doesn't mean that they know you better than I do. And you have a place to be yourself, and that's with me. And I loved showing that, like, you have to take yourself out of capitalism, and that's where you'll find family and joy. And like her warmth and her family and her life and her love, like, it's outside of work. And if she would just recognize that in Malika, like, she wouldn't have had to go through this whole crazy thing. But I also loved, I think when in 103, when we got Cassie Maddox and Shakira DeMacier on set to play young Diana and young Kendra Ray, and you see the flashbacks and you see the comparisons between the younger women and the women of a previous generation, and how they're part of this legacy of loneliness and oppression and capitalism coming in between friendships. I was like, oh yes, these actors are showing us what the show is about. We're seeing it on their faces, and they were just, we were so lucky with those women. They're so talented, the young Kendra and young Diana.
What's really interesting is depending on who you talk to, they have a different perspective of the show. It's either comedy, satire, horror elements. So I was wondering, how do you get to develop a show that can speak to all, but you don't want to lose your way and say, oh, this is the comedy part, here's the satire part?
Carefully, slowly and carefully. You know, Gus and I, we definitely had much less experience in the thriller and the spooky. And so it was definitely a balancing act for us. And thank goodness we had the writer's room to lean on. You know, we had Zakiya there. We had Kara Brown, who had just finished writing for Swarm. So she brought a lot of a wealth of knowledge to how to do that balancing act. But we just tried really hard. You know, I wish you could see our like enormous writers boards of like tracking every single mystery, tracking Nella's arc, tracking what's going on with Shani, tracking what we know about Kendra Ray, tracking what we know about the Grease, tracking what's happening with Jesse, and just like every single for the season, for each episode, scene to scene, and just trying to make sure that we were careful in the way that we were unfolding the story, because I think that we sort of felt like if we got the mystery right and that played well, then the other, you know, the comedy, the horror, the supernatural elements could be sort of like icing, as long as the story was feeling real and making sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything Jordan said. And I think I also loved Mariama's answer earlier about Nella. And if you are true and grounded, and you know that this is Nella's experience, and you follow Nella, you see everything that Nella sees, and that's your perspective. You can balance all of the genre elements, because she is going through these, but she's being a normal person about it, but she's going through these heightened situations. So I think that was sort of our North Star.
No, thank you. This show is, it's so relatable on so many levels, I think, to all of us, and much needed. AAFCA is sending you much kudos, much hope for continued success. And we'd like to say thank you, because this is what we call good television. So on behalf of the world's largest group of Black film and TV critics, thank you for watching this edition of AAFCA Roundtables. Have a great day.